You're listening to the Epic All Day podcast with Jim Simcoe. I'm here to help you make your life epic, so let's get rolling with the show. Hey everybody, welcome to the Epic All Day podcast. I'm so stoked to have my friend Peter Scott IV here today. It's good to see you.
Jim, good to see you, brother. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you got it, man. It's nice to see you outside of the gym. And
I know, right?
And we're not sweating and doing power cleans right now.
Isn't it weird seeing people from the gym in clothes, like street clothes?
It's so strange.
Yeah.
It's so strange. I've actually run into people like just kind of around town and you're like, hey, wow, you dress up. You clean up nice.
Yeah, exactly.
You clean up nice when you have sweat like pouring out of you and your hair's not all looking crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a pleasure to have you here. The topic today is how to live fearlessly. I really think this is one people are going to really dig. And I know that you really embody this type of work and this is really kind of what you're about. So maybe could you give us a little bit of a background about you? Like, where are you from? What do you do? Just give everyone.
For sure I can, yeah. The reason, first of all, why I'm so passionate about this is simply because, Jim, my entire life has been consumed by fear. So I've lived all over.
That's a hell of an opening.
Yeah. So that right there, like it consumed my entire life. And as far back as, and I'll make this quick, but this is an important part of the story. When I was 10 years old, I had to sit down in a courtroom with my mom, my grandmother, and an attorney.
Oh, God.
And I had to look into my mom's eyes at 10 and tell her that I no longer felt safe living with her because of her alcoholism.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And the reason I'm sharing this is because, the listener can relate to maybe not that traumatic of an event, but anytime we're growing up, we go through an event, and if it's traumatic, we decide, our mind creates a decision that creates a limiting belief.
Right, without a doubt.
And that's what happened to me, and it led to an inauthentic version of me and, people-pleasing tendencies and all of this.
Yeah, has a huge domino effect.
Huge. And I was, living with different parts of family and moving all around, and so I really got into this because I wanted to understand what was this thing that was holding me back and stopping me, and it was fear. So, yeah.
Now tell me, all right, so we're going to get into all that, but tell me, where are you actually from? What part of the country?
So I say that I'm from Connecticut because I went to grade school and high school there.
Okay.
So that's where I'm from, even though I've lived like 6-7 different places.
Where was where was the place you lived that was your favorite place?
Right now, San Diego.
Obviously, San Diego.
I mean, you can't beat it. So before San Diego, I would say Chicago. I lived in Chicago for 6 years, and man,
Chicago is a cool place.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about Chicago, for me anyway, is I've been there a ton of times for work, but it's one of the few places in the world I've ever been where literally every person I've ever met from Chicago, they're all cool. Yeah. They've got that Midwestern vibe, but kind of a city vibe too. So they're just like all like hardworking, nice, super polite people. Like they're kind of like New Yorkers without all the angst and the attitude.
For sure.
And so they're super cosmopolitan. So all right, cool.
Yeah.
What was I always like to ask people, I think so many of our interesting things that happen to us and how we get defined in our lives are started at a young age, primarily in high school. Yes. What was high school like from you? What was what did you learn in high school? Was it a good experience?
Man, I loved high school. I had a really good high school experience. I had great friends. I lived in a small town, like town of 7,000 people. My high school gym, my graduating class had 73 students.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Public school, right? Everyone knew everyone.
Yeah.
My friends' parents were my parents. My parents were my friends' parents, that sort of thing. And it was a lot of fun. And I was still in a place of like massive insecurity, wasn't comfortable with dating girls yet and all of that stuff.
Nobody is
had huge fear in those areas. I played some sports.
What did you play?
Played golf, actually, even though we were just talking about Eric.
That.
I know. I played golf. I was captain of my golf team.
It's so funny. Like the people I know who are like super athletes, they all played golf.
Really?
You and Eric.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a couple other people.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not proud to say this, but we didn't have a football team, so I never got to play football. And I know you played football.
And you're not missing anything.
Oh,
high school
man.
Football's not...
really?
If you're really good, high school football is awesome.
Yeah.
If you are not good, it's so painful. It's so painful. That's why I end up I switched from football to lacrosse my freshman year in high school because I fell in love with the history of lacrosse and it was like all guys my size.
Yeah.
And just you run around. They give you a stick to hit people. I mean, it's pretty kind of a cool thing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, football could be rough. Okay, so high school was great. You really loved it. You still in touch with your high school friends?
I am, yeah. The only downside was actually the name of our school. Okay. So talk about, a time in your life when it's easy to be embarrassed.
Sure.
Our mascot, what we were called, were the Nathan Hale Ray, which is fine, Little noises. Literally, the name of our, like, you know how most schools are like the Cougars or the Scorpions or the Wolverines.
Yeah,
we were the little noises.
No,
we had to like run out of the tunnel as the little noises, and teams would just laugh at us.
That's horrible. That's why you didn't have a football team. You can't have a football team with that name.
That's so true.
Jeez, that's horrible. All right, couple rapid fire questions for you. For no particular reason than have other people to get to learn a little bit more about you. What's your favorite movie?
First movie that comes to mind is Braveheart. I know it's like a common one. Oh yeah, Braveheart was an epic film.
You're the first person in our podcast who's ever said Braveheart.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being, I don't know how old, 10 years old, seeing that in the theater, being like completely blown away. Yeah, exactly.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Okay, cool. What about favorite album?
Favorite album, I would say Legend by Bob Marley and the Wailers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's got some great numbers.
Yeah,
for sure.
Cool. Right on.
Yeah.
All right. What about last question on that? Favorite book?
This is the hardest one for me to choose because there's so many epic books that I love. The one that comes to mind is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
I never read it. You loved it though?
Huge. Yeah. I mean, it's a big book to read. It's like 1,500 pages. And when it comes to the mindset of being a producer versus a consumer, the entrepreneurial mindset, I think it's the most epic book you could ever read.
You think it's a good business book?
Phenomenal. Yes.
Because I find, tell me what you think about this. I find the best business books are the ones that aren't business books.
Yes.
Like to me, I have two favorite books, or I would say probably my favorite book of all time is The Godfather.
Okay.
And to me,
I've never read the book.
It's unbelievable. But I'm telling you, if you buy it, you'll curse me if you have anything planned.
Because nothing else will get done.
You can't. You don't do it when your girlfriend's going out of town. You don't have an event. You've got nothing going on. Yep. If the weather's bad, which it never is in San Diego, or you can just go to the beach, you need 3-4 hours the first day alone.
Wow.
Just knowing you're going to be deep in it.
Okay.
But I think that's the best business book of all time. I learned more about business reading that book than any of the other several thousand business books I've read in my life.
Now I want to go read it.
It's fantastic.
I've seen the film. Love it.
Yeah. The movie's great. Okay. The movie, I think the movie is almost as good as the book, but the book has so many other plot lines and subplot lines in it that it makes you appreciate the movie more. Like you see different things that they do and things with Sonny and Michael and backstories that they hint at them in the movie and you maybe don't catch them in the movie.
Yep.
But then when you see it in the movie after reading the book, you're like, oh, that's the thing Sonny had with whatever. There's just some also really funny parts in it too. So
do you read books or you listen to them more now?
I read. So I'm old school. I probably read 1 or 2 books a week.
Wow.
And I'll go on streaks. I'll go on streaks where I don't read, as much, but I keep my books. This is just kind of my thing, but in our house, I have like on the kitchen countertop, I've got where I put my keys and my wallet.
Yep.
I have a money tree plant there.
Yep.
Then I've got like my glasses and my iPad, but I'll probably have 6 or 7 books at any given time are what I'm reading. I always have a couple of fiction books.
Yep.
And then I have a couple of probably business books, and then I have 1 or 2 nonprofit books nonfiction books as well. I had a professor in college, and he said the best education you could ever get was if you were able to read 10,000 books on any subject.
Wow.
And he's a cool deal. I've talked about this before, but so in his house, he's from another guy from Connecticut. In his house, his whole house, it was all bookshelves. So he had 3 bookshelves just in his bathroom.
Oh, that's awesome.
He had his coffee table book was a color book about ants that was like 6 inches thick, 1,000 pages, just different pictures of ants and studies of ants. And this is just like, I don't know. He was just like, he was just that guy.
Yeah.
And I think he's right. I think he learns so much more about books than you can in anything else. So I make it a point to read as much as I possibly can.
For sure.
What about you?
My ritual is I read every single day, but first thing in the morning. It's very different than most people. First thing in the morning guy? So my morning ritual starts with, as I'm like drinking a green juice or a green smoothie, I'm waking up and I'm reading a book. And that's always kind of like my time to learn or my time to get in the right state of mind. Because for me, by the end of the day, after work, after dinner, after connecting with my girlfriend, I'm exhausted. I don't know about you. So if I start getting in front of a book, I'm going to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So
I find I read, because I've got 2 daughters and I'm married and we've got pets and the whole thing. So we have a pretty busy house. There are pockets Like I can go for stretches on weekends if like stuff's going on. Where I
Yes.
can get a couple hours in. I'll read at night. Sometimes it'll make me tired. I have a pretty active brain, so I need to slow it down.
Yep.
So if I will deliberately sometimes read stuff like heavier stuff at night. Like I'll read about Stoicism, which I love.
Yes.
And I'll do it at night. I may only get a couple pages of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, but it's great. It's heavy and it's right before I go to bed and it makes me fall asleep.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right, cool. Very cool. All right. So let's talk about your story.
Yes.
Tell everybody what you do. Who do you help? Why did you start it? Give us the Peter Scott story.
Okay, cool. So I kind of started on this a little earlier in the podcast. But what I do is I help high performing corporate executives, entrepreneurs, salespeople literally transform their relationship with fear so that it no longer stops them.
Okay.
And
I'm going to come back to this because I want to hear about the term relationship with fear because it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the reason why I say that, and I'll elaborate on that now, is because even though my book is The Fearless Mindset, my event is a Fearless Life Experience, a lot of people are like, Peter, do you think it's possible to be without fear? Right. And I don't. And even though the word that I choose is fearless, I don't mean being without fear. What I mean is having the courage to do the very thing that scares you. And when you default to that of noticing, okay, I've got this fear of judgment or rejection or charging my worth or failing, whatever that is coming up for you, the default needs to be into action, not, how do I overcome this fear? How do I get rid of it? That's not possible. It's choosing to do the very thing that terrifies you. And through that fear becomes less and less.
Right. The impact on it becomes
exactly.
less.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's not a lack. So you're not telling people, hey, we're going to eradicate all your fear. You're more, hey, you have fear. Let's acknowledge it. How do we move? How do we still move forward with it?
Exactly. And how can you channel it in a good way? Right. Because like when you look at anything that my belief is that the only thing that's stopping people is fear. And it's not fear of, imminent danger, right? That's a fear that's a good thing, right? That fight, like if you were woken up in the middle of the night to a burglar breaking into your home, that fear, that's a good thing. I want you to keep that.
Sure.
Right? But that fear that you feel if you're to be interviewed on a podcast or if you're going to launch an event or if you're going to share a message from stage, that fear of being judged, of being rejected, that's an irrational fear that's keeping people from living. So those are the fears that were consuming my entire life. And I literally was so dissatisfied with where I was at in my mid-20s. I had a series of events that happened where I was working in investment banking. I was living in Chicago, and I was working 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And there were two events that happened. Number one was I remember being in the office till about 11 p.m. at night on a Thursday. And I was the only one there alongside one of the partners, one of the managing directors of the company.
Right.
And he had nothing pressing due the next day. There was no meeting. There was no pitch. There was nothing. And I wondered why he was there. And he literally was there because he was afraid to go home to his family because he had neglected them for so long. He would just stay in the office.
Wow.
And this was
He told you this?
He told me this, yeah. So this was my mentor. This was the man that I aspired to become. He had all the things that I thought I wanted. He had the cars and the suits and the big homes and all of that. And I just realized to do that at the cost of my relationships or at the cost of my health wasn't worth it.
Was he a healthy guy? Was he?
No, he neglected everything. He did great work for the company. He closed deals. He made a ton of money, but he did it at the cost of all these other areas.
Oh.
And it just made me realize in my mid-20s, like, it's not worth it to me to do that.
Right.
And it was terrifying because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just discovered in that moment I didn't want to do that, right?
And that, don't you think that that's one of the most terrifying things when you're like, wow, I hate this, but I don't necessarily have an alternative.
Yes, like, for sure.
I want to get out of this, but I don't necessarily know where to go from here.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that's an experience that a lot of people have is they are in a job, for example, where they're getting paid well and it's paying the bills, it's providing the quality of life that they want, but they're not passionate about what they're doing. Or they're not happy with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
So how did that? So you're working 90-hour weeks, investment banking in Chicago.
Yeah,
sounds like that was your big moment. You're like, oh, this is horrible.
Yeah, so that was leading up to the big moment. So that was one event. The second event was I got a phone call from a family member that really altered the course of my life, and I think many of us can relate to having that call whether it was good or for bad. And it was a family member telling me that my father had just been rushed to the hospital.
Oh.
And I was 25 years old, and they said, Peter, you've got to fly home immediately if you want to say goodbye.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it was one of those phone calls. And I remember flying home to Connecticut and walking into Middlesex Hospital in Middletown, Connecticut, and seeing my dad, who is my childhood hero.
Right.
Just emaciated in the hospital bed in hospice. And
was he old?
He wasn't. He was 60 years old.
Oh,
And
wow,
this
young.
now this didn't come to me as a surprise because his health had been deteriorating pretty rapidly for the prior 5 years. He was in and out of the hospital. He had many close brushes with death. And I remember sitting there and asking him, Dad, why did you do this to yourself? And why did you do this to me? I had a lot of anger and a lot of sadness towards that. And he looked at me and he said, Peter, because I am afraid. And that was the moment. My father, Jim, was afraid of not living up to his parents' expectations.
What did he do for work?
He wasn't working. He, his dad, my grandfather, incredible man, highly successful, great husband, not the best dad. He was one of those men who, unbelievable industrialist, philanthropist, gave back a lot, except to his own family.
Wow.
And so my father kept living in the shadow of his dad for many years, and literally chose to give up on life and drink himself to death. And so that's why he passed away so young at 60. I was 25, and I just watched this deterioration over the last 5 years of his life. And that was the moment, like, we have these moments that put life in perspective, where you realize how fragile life is and how limited our time is. Yeah. And that's when I decided, you know what? Tomorrow's not guaranteed to me. It's not guaranteed to anyone.
Right.
I've got to get out of this job. So
wow. And so you're in Chicago.
Yep.
Just out of curiosity, so you're working 90 hours a week. What was your health like at that time?
Horrible. Oh my gosh, you got to see the before picture of me.
Are they bad?
So you've only known me here since CrossFit, since we've been training together.
For those of you who listen, and I'll put a picture of Pete on that. I mean, Pete is a good-looking dude who's in great shape. So
I'll share the before picture of me, so you can post it.
Send me the before and then the after.
The listener, so for you listening to this, imagine a fat Napoleon Dynamite. That's what I look like.
With the hair?
Yes. Oh, so I had the hair, awesome. I had the big afro, I had glasses on. Man, it was ugly.
It was rough.
And it was just, because when you're working 90 hours a week, you're chained to a cubicle. I'm eating, really bad processed foods all the time.
Yeah.
I didn't go work out. That was kind of the lifestyle of the investment banker.
I went to my high school reunion a few years ago, and so a guy I was pretty good friends with in high school, but I hadn't seen in a long time. And at the time in high school, and I won't say his name on the off chance he's listening, he's probably not, because he's probably still working 90 hours a week. At the time in high school, he was a 3-sport athlete, like good looking guy in great shape, the whole deal. And I saw him at the reunion, and he must have weighed 300 pounds. And it's just huge now. Excuse me. And he's a hedge fund guy, or a private equity guy in New York City. And he just works all the time. And he is just ballooned up. He looks so unhealthy. And I'm like, this is unbelievable. This is a guy who, like, on the football field just was like, he was all state this, all state that. He was on the basketball team. He was just unreal athlete. He was vice president of the class. I was president. He was vice VP. But just super stud all the way around. And I see him now, and I was like, and he's worth a ton of money. That's a ton of cash.
For sure.
But like this dude, I was like, man, you can't have another beer, dude. I don't want you to like pass out and
for
die
sure. Yeah.
while we're at our reunions. It's just crazy work.
And it actually requires work to gain that much weight. Like
right,
I went to exactly, because like I went to a friend's wedding back in Ohio. I went to Ohio State for undergrad, so like my college career was in the Midwest, and I remember seeing a lot of friends from college, and a lot of them gained a lot of weight.
Right.
And they saw me, and they're kind of like, Peter, how did you do what you've done? Because I had my own transformation in a good way, and I was thinking to them, how did you go the other way? Like,
right.
I think it's actually harder to go the other way.
I think it is too. I think
you know what I mean?
You almost have to have a willful disregard.
Yes.
And then also the other thing is, like, you see yourself every day after you get out of the shower in the mirror. Like after a while, and I guess it's a gradual thing where you don't notice.
Yeah.
And just after a while, you're just like, oh, wow, like I've gone from just being in shape to having a dad bod.
Yep.
And now I don't have a dad bod. Now I'm actually fat. Now I'm fat. And now I'm, like really obese. Like, how does that happen?
Totally.
Okay, let's keep going. So that's how you got into this work. So tell me, you talked a little bit about it as it relates to your dad and things that happened to you when you're 10. But so why do you do this work? Because I can't imagine that it's easy. And I can't imagine, I mean, if no offense to anybody, but like as an investment banker, you make a ridiculous amount of money.
For sure.
So you've sort of chosen a very honorable samurai-esque servant model where like you probably don't make as much as you could have made. And my guess is the work is way harder.
So yes, the work is more challenging for sure.
Right.
Because building a business, that in of itself requires a lot of courage and commitment and mastering things that at first you just are absolutely horrible at.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I remember leaving that industry and my colleagues, my coworkers, my mentors thinking I was absolutely insane and being like, Peter, you're going to be back here a year from now, back getting into this job
you
again.
were kind of there in the heyday too.
For sure. Yeah. I started right at the height of the market. I did see the meltdown. I was in it during the meltdown. Okay. So I remember 50% of my firm being laid off and me still being there, going from working 80 hours a week to 110 hours a week because we lost half our staff. So you must have been a
producer then
For sure.
You weren't part of it.
So that was the other challenging part, was that I was a producer. So my identity got a lot of significance from being a producer in that industry, right? Gotcha. And so, but to answer your question of, I genuinely feel, Jim, like this is my purpose in life. Like I went through all the events in my life, all the traumatic experiences for a reason. And it was to learn how to shift my own relationship with fear and learn certain steps that I've taken to overcome those fears. And I feel like it's like my moral obligation in a way to go and teach others how to do that. And I just feel so committed to working with the high performers of the world because they create a ripple effect. Right. When you can impact a high producing executive or an entrepreneur, they go impact their company, they go impact their community, their family, right? You know what I mean? And it just has this ripple effect out there. Yeah. And honestly, yes, definitely the first few years, I sacrificed a lot financially because I was making a lot more as an investment banker. Yeah, sure. Now, after doing this for a few years, I see the potential of me earning way more money in my business. So it's, yes, there's a transition period there for sure. But now that I've got systems in place and I'm growing my business and things like that, I see levels of wealth and abundance that I could not have achieved if I stayed, in the investment banking career.
You probably, if you stayed in investment banking, you probably would have burned out at some point.
For sure.
Because those guys all tend to burn out. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about living fearlessly and what that means. And so I have a couple of just overall questions I want to ask you about that. And then before we get into the actual steps, so how do you define fearless living? What does that mean for you? I mean, I know you work with people one-on-one, which we're going to talk about later, and you do events, but so you've dealt with this a lot. It seems like this has been a cornerstone of your life, but how would you define living fearlessly? What does it mean?
Yeah, so to go back to kind of what I was sharing around the word fearless earlier, it's not being without fear. That's the big thing that I want the listener to take away. To expect for you to be without fear is going to set you up for being disappointed, because if you are without fear, then you're probably just playing small. Honestly, you're probably just being in your comfort zone, right? The more that you feel fear, I think it means that you're stretching yourself. It's a good thing, right? And it's a default to action. That's what I would define it as. So instead of saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm afraid of public speaking, so I need to, read all the books and I need to, do all these things and learn all these skill sets before I go step on stage," someone who's living fearlessly just steps on stage, and risks looking stupid and risks fumbling, and you learn as you go. And if that's your default in everything, maybe there's a difficult conversation that you're afraid to have with your spouse. Right. Instead of avoiding it, you step into that. Right. The thing that you're most afraid of doing is the most valuable thing for you to do. And when you can do that in your body and in your relationships and in your spirituality and your business, that's living fearlessly.
Yeah, it's funny. There's I so agree with everything you're saying, and it reminds me of, and this is going to sound super weird, but I'm going to say it anyway. Risky Business, the movie Risky Business.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So I personally, I
haven't seen that in years. I love the movie.
Neither have I. I probably haven't seen it in 15 years, but it's awesome. But so one of the quotes in the movie is when the guy is interviewing to go to Princeton or whatever,
Yes.
when Tom Cruise is interviewing, he says, sometimes you got to say, what the F and make your move.
Yes.
And I feel like that's, a funny quote in a funny movie,
Yeah.
and they're just kind of making light of it. But I really feel like that's, man, if you live your life that way,
Yep.
it's actually not a bad way to live. It kind of makes some sense.
For sure.
Along those lines, I mean, how attainable do you think it is to live fearlessly and do what you do?
I think every single person, anyone, it doesn't matter who it is, has the potential to do that. Now, the question is, are they willing to experience discomfort? Because one's capacity for discomfort, like they have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And honestly, most people choose not to.
Right.
So everyone has the potential, and the reason why I think so few people are is because they don't want to go through that discomfort. They want to stay where they're at. And if you're listening to this, 99%, I mean, you wouldn't be listening to Jim's podcast if you were someone who is just kind of in your comfort zone, right? You listen to things like this, you read, you listen to people like Tim Ferriss and things like that because you want to grow.
Right.
So there's a subset that we get to be the example. We get to be the lighthouses of what's possible by how we're living our life.
Right. I think what's cool about what you just said, and I don't want to gloss over. I want to make sure everyone hears that. Is like what you said was, as it refers to attainability, it's like everyone has the potential to doing it or to living fearlessly. It's a matter of willingness.
Yes,
and I think that's the key, right? So, like, I might want to become a brain surgeon. I don't have that potential. I haven't gone to medical school. I don't know anything about the human body. Like, I just don't have that potential, even if I was willing to do it.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is like, no, we all have that ability. It's inherent within us. Yeah. It's just whether you're willing to do it or not.
That's exactly right.
Which is cool. Okay.
When I launched my business, my coaching business, I had tremendous fear around that. Right. Because I knew that my coworkers would see my messages or posts on Facebook. I knew that my family would see everything that I was doing, and I had so much fear around being judged and being rejected and failing, and I just made the default to it doesn't matter what other people think. And I got so connected to my mission that I viewed it, honestly, Jim, as a disservice to humanity if I didn't do that. So I did things like literally turn my Facebook page into a personal diary for everyone to read. I shared things like you can't imagine, like what I just shared with you. Yeah. I would talk about that with my mom being on my face, like, you know what I mean? Like really crazy stuff.
My stomach is literally
totally, yeah. And I would shoot video. I remember a 90-day period. I shot a video every single day. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know what my message was. I just did it, and I became more confident as a result of doing. That's one thing. If you're listening to this, write this down. If you're not driving. And if you are driving, come back and listen to this part. Confidence is a result. It is not a requirement.
Right.
It's a result from doing the very thing that scares you. That's how you build confidence. It's not waiting around to be more confident before you go take that action.
Right.
It's take that action and you will become.
And then confidence also, I think, is spins off of that in the sense that the more confidence you have, the more willingness you have to do things and try risk. And then the more willingness to try things and do things, the more confident you become. So it's a nice circle.
For sure.
Nice little circle of love there.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into, I want to talk about people who are listening, steps for them to live fearlessly. Let's just say 4 steps. What are the 4 steps, overarching themes you would suggest to people to start living fearlessly?
Okay. So first would be to actually define your fear.
Okay.
So if you think about it, we feel fear, right? And I said earlier, actually I haven't said this yet, but there's 2 types of fear. There's rational fears that keep us alive. Those are good fears.
Yep, and there's a fire burning down the street.
Exactly.
I need to run the other direction.
Totally. And there's irrational fears that keep us from living. The fear of failure, the fear of judgment, those fears. So it's defining what is that fear number 1, and then actually getting so clear into what the worst case scenario of that fear becoming reality. Like, what is your nightmare? Clarify it.
Okay.
So like, for example, if you had a fear of giving a presentation at work, right? Okay, that's the surface level fear. Then you go deeper and you feel like, oh my gosh, if you tank in your presentation, then you could lose the bonus that you were expecting, or the raise. And then if that happens, then you actually won't be able to pay the mortgage on the house that you just moved in because your wife is pregnant with your firstborn. Like, get into the worst case scenario, look at it, and just don't think about it. Take it out of your mind and write it out. Literally list that out. So that's step one. Okay. Step two, and the way I came up with this, just so you know, Jim, is I interviewed a lot of different people for my book, The Fearless Mindset, and I learned from the experts that I looked at as living fearlessly. One of those is a guy named Tim Ferriss. Yeah. Right. And he talks about a process similar to this, which I think is really, really powerful. So I want to give him credit and Jesse Eller credit for this too. Second would be to actually list out what are the things that you could do to prevent that fear from happening. So we all could do little things to prevent the worst case scenario from happening. Okay. And when we see that, it doesn't feel as terrifying. All right. That would be step two. Step three would be, if that worst case scenario does happen, what could you do to repair the situation? Okay. All right. So what are the actions you could take to repair it? And once you can see what it is, how to prevent it, and how to repair it, it's not as scary.
Okay. Here's what I want to do. Yeah. I want you to take me, because this is not on topic, or this is on the topic, but a different direction. I want you to take me through one of my fears. Okay. Awesome. And this is not, it's not like a huge one. Okay. But I think it's probably one that other people have, right? For sure. So, even when I was in college, working out, like running 2 miles in the morning, going to lacrosse practice, practicing for 2 hours, and then lifting weights for 2 hours after that, like literally doing 4 hours of training every single day. I was in pretty good shape, but I still have love handles. Yep. My real father, my biological father, had love handles. I mean, like it just is part of my thing. So I've always been super self-conscious about taking my shirt off, no matter where I am. Which is kind of funny because I love wearing tank tops. So I wear tank tops all the time. Yeah. Surprisingly, I'm not wearing one today. I don't know why, but I wear tank tops all the time. But I do not like taking my shirt off at the beach. Yep. Walk me through that. So let's go deeper. Because the weather's hot. Okay. I mean, it's hot right now. Totally. So here's the thing. So number one is there's a deeper fear related to the fear of taking your shirt off, because the act of taking your shirt off is actually not what you're afraid of doing. What is the thing that you're afraid of happening once you take your shirt off? That people are going to look at me and they're going to say like, oh, he's got love handles, or he doesn't look good with his shirt off, or something like that. I'm going to get judged. Okay. I feel like that's okay. I'm going to get judged. And if you were to get judged, what does that mean about you? What does that mean about me? Yeah. What means, like, I'm not good enough. I'm not in shape. I've never wanted to be associated with, like people who don't work out. I mean, because I work out all the time. Yep. I mean, I see you all the time. Yep. Like, I work out all the time. I'm pretty active. I've never wanted to be, oh, I think that guy just sits behind a desk and doesn't work out and whatever. Yep. And would you consider yourself, your own identity, as someone who's healthy, someone who's active? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is it actually has little to do with the reality of it. It has more to do with the meaning that you're attaching to it, right? From a imagination of what someone else could think of you. Is that true? Oh yeah. So this is a really important thing. Is number one, in the moment of doing that, of you being on the beach without your shirt, you actually wouldn't feel fear in that moment. When you feel fear is thinking about doing that in the future. Oh yeah, without a doubt. So that's a really important distinction. Is that fear is a chaotic projection of a painful future. Okay. So by sitting here and thinking about that scenario, that scares you, right? So yeah, I would take you through the process of, write out, like, what is the worst case scenario, right? Like list that stuff out. And then what are some things that you could do to prevent that from happening? Obviously, you are already on the path of your own fitness and nutrition, right? So continuing to prioritize that. What is one thing that you could do to repair that, right? If that was to happen, if someone is a judge, how could you process that emotion or let that go or allow them to have their own experience, because it has nothing to do with you. Yeah. It has everything to do with them. Which is funny you say that, because I feel like I feel that way. Like I always think that, like, I have a small group of friends and a small, smaller family. Mm-hmm. And like, those are really the only people I care about who think about where I really worry about, like, what they think of me. Like I worry about what my wife thinks of me. Yeah, my daughters, for sure. It's a really small group after that. It's not many people. Yeah. So it's kind of funny. So like, theoretically, in theory, I wouldn't be bothered by someone looking at me on the beach and saying like, that guy has love handles. But for some reason in my head, it does, like you're saying,
for sure,
imaginary thing.
Yeah.
Makes it.
And doing something like in the real world. So if you were to just, during your afternoon like break or during lunch break, you literally are steps from the beach here.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were to walk out and just be like, you know what, I'm going to walk to the beach and back and I'm going to take my shirt off.
Oh, God.
And I'm just going to do that every single day. And I guarantee you after a few days, you would feel way less fear by doing that.
All right. I'm going to try that. I will try that and see how it goes. I'll let you know
Awesome.
how that goes. Because that definitely makes me nervous, makes my stomach clench, which means that it's probably something I really need to do.
For sure.
Unfortunately.
For sure.
God, I really wish I hadn't asked you that question.
Now, last thing, I want to complete the last step.
Yep.
So last step is to actually get clear on the cost of not doing the thing that scares you. So what is the cost of inaction? So a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid of launching this new product in my business because what if it fails? My question to you would be, what is the cost of not doing that? What is the cost of letting another 5 or 10 or 20 years pass you by if you're in a job that you hate? Isn't that cost greater than the risk or the cost of taking a leap of faith and pursuing that? And that's the biggest thing. That to go back to my father passing away, that's what happened in that event. When that happened, I looked at, okay, here's this other mentor of mine, and if I don't do anything about this, I'm going to be that in 10 years or 20 years. Right. That's a much greater cost than me saying, you know what, I'm going to quit my job and go pursue my passion. And I may be successful or I may fall on my face, but I'd rather take a risk at doing that than let my life pass me by.
It's funny too that you say that, because I feel like most people who make those huge transformative moves, they end up being successful most times. They end up, and maybe not on their first thing, maybe not even on their third or their fourth, but they just kind of keep grinding because they believe in it so strongly.
Yes.
And they end up hitting success at some point. And I really do think that there's a deep connection between when you are connected to what you really should be doing in the world, and then also what you want to do in the world.
Yep.
It just makes everything else easy. And I know that people listening, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening do things that they're good at. So when I owned a real estate company and I had 70 agents and 5 offices, we were successful because I'm good at that. And it's easy for me to manage. Like, I'm good at that. But it definitely wasn't filling my soul.
Yes.
And so even though I was making a lot of money and we were doing really well, like every day was just like, I remember coming in, it would be 8:00. I'd be like, I would look at the clock in half an hour and be like, oh, it's 8:30. I'd look at it another half hour and be like, it's 8:40. I'd look at it again in an hour.
Oh,
like,
yes.
It's 8:50. I'm
I can
like,
relate to that.
Get to 9:00?
Yep.
Like, because at 9:00, there's only 3 hours before lunch. And then at lunch, like, oh, there's only 4 hours until 5. I can hopefully get out of here. And it's so bad.
Yeah.
Whereas with what I'm doing now, the day flies by and it's 5:30 at night. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like, geez, I need to eat lunch. Like, where did this day go? Okay. Out of those steps, I think you already answered it, but I want to make sure we're solid on this. What's the most important step?
Yeah, doing the thing that scares you. So like we were talking about, fear of taking the shirt off and being on the beach, guess what? You get to do that every day, for the next week. And just by doing that one thing alone, that fear is going to get smaller and smaller.
Oh my God, I can't believe I'm committing to doing that.
I love that you asked me that question.
I know. I can't believe I asked you that question. I was going to note to myself to maybe not do that in the future. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I only have a couple more questions for you.
Yes.
What's the very first thing people should do right now to start living a fearless life and start following some of the stuff that you're saying? What's the very first thing someone should do besides read your book? I'm going to put a link to your book.
Thank you.
I've actually read your book and it's fantastic.
Awesome.
And I don't say that about a lot of books or people who've been on here. So I will put a link to that. But what's the first thing they should do?
Get clear on the thing that you're most afraid of. Literally write it down and take one step today to move towards doing that. So if it is to leave your job, right, and launch a business, am I suggesting you to, quit your job when you have nothing else lined up? No, I'm not suggesting that. However, I'm suggesting that you clarify one step that you could take towards doing that, if that makes sense, because motion creates emotion. And when you get into motion, you start seeing the proof and the evidence that you need to feel more courageous. Yeah. So what is that thing that you're afraid of doing? And then what is one small micro step that you could take to move towards that? Because you will turn around 30 days from now, 90 days from now. And it's amazing, Jim. We don't have the eyes to see our full potential.
Right.
So there's so much unknown, and that stops a lot of people. And my recommendation would be to just put one step in front of the other and take that first step, because by doing that, more and more of that path becomes illuminated.
Interesting. When you say write down your fear, let's just drill into that a little bit. Do you mean I am like, what verbiage? Like, are you saying like, I am afraid of losing my job, or I am afraid of going out on my own? I'm afraid of taking my shot. You just like just a statement. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
So yes, and if you can actually define the fear, that would be more valuable, right? So it's like if you were afraid of failing, right? If that's your fear, is failing or judgment or rejection, you write out what that is, and then you actually complete. And here's a sentence stem that someone can do is say, if I was no longer afraid of blank, I would ... Okay. So if I was no longer afraid of rejection, I would ask that person out. If I was no longer afraid of failure, I would launch that start my own business. Gotcha. Exactly.
Okay. All right. That's great advice. And just take a small step can really be anything, right? Like, so let's using your example of someone who's afraid of starting their own business and they're going to take a small step. The small step could be buying a book on how to start a business.
Exactly. Yeah.
It could be listening to a podcast about that.
Yep.
It could be writing out, like a goal, goals of what the business would be. It doesn't have to be writing a business plan and quitting your job and getting a new office.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, my first step of launching a business, and this is pretty radical, but I hired a mentor. I knew the importance of having a mentor who had the results that I wanted.
Yeah.
And, some people do this, not everyone, but I invested $20,000 in my first mentor, which was a year of school. It was a huge leap of faith. And that was money I didn't have. It was my savings. It was money I borrowed from family. It was credit card debt. It was all of those things. Right. And yet that is what I needed to do to really feel committed to what I was building, and also accelerate my results. Because I think anyone can achieve anything on their own. It just takes longer to do it by yourself. Why not find someone who's already done that, or who can help you accelerate that process and collapse, what could take you 4 years into 1 year.
Right. Right. Yeah. Which makes sense. Okay. Final thoughts.
Yes.
Give me some final thoughts for the audience. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I've got another question for you after this, but any final thoughts for our group?
I would say just go back. If you're anything like me, you listen to a lot of interviews, you read a lot of books, and I don't want you to listen to this for just information's sake. But the final thought that I would leave you with is go back and write out 1, 2, or 3 things that you're going to actually implement from this interview. That is the most important thing. It's so easy to want to acquire more and more knowledge. And I don't believe that knowledge is power. I believe that applied knowledge is power, right? So it's like, how can you take these strategies? Exactly. How can you take these strategies and go implement that? And by doing that, you are living fearlessly and you're being the example for what's possible.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. How can people find you? How do they get in touch with you?
Thank you, Jim. So one thing I'd love to do is I'd love to give a gift to the listeners.
Yeah, fantastic.
So if any of you, as you've listened to this interview, resonated with, oh my gosh, I've got some big fears in my life and I need some more support and overcome, which is everyone, right?
Is yet to meet someone who doesn't have any fears.
Totally. I've created something that I want to give as a gift, and it's a 5-day Face Your Fear challenge. It's an online challenge, and basically you join the challenge, you get a short daily video from me for 5 days. Oh, cool. And it teaches you an aspect of fear, let's say fear of public speaking, and it challenges you to go overcome that fear that day. And the next day is fear of failure. The next day is fear of charging your worth. So the listener can join that for free at challengeyourfear.com. That's challengeyourfear.com.
I'll put a link to that in show notes. So challengeyourfear.com.
Yep. And then I would love to connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. If you just search Peter Scott IV as in the 4th, you can connect with me there. And then if any of you want to come to San Diego and spend 3 days of conquering fear, the experience of conquering fear, I lead a retreat called the Fearless Life Experience, and I limit it to 10 people. At the time of this recording, it's not until March 16th through the 18th of 2018. So there's time. But
if they follow you on social media, they can get information.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a video trailer at fearlesslifeexperience.com. They can check that out if they want to.
And your previous event, just from watching the trailer, it just looks like it was awesome. And the other thing is, I think Pete will be doing some stuff with us and hopefully speaking at one of our
Yes.
upcoming retreats as well. So, all right. So I'm going to put all your social media in there.
Awesome.
I'll put a link to the book and a link to the challenge because I think
Great.
it's something that everyone would dig. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much for being here. First of all,
Jim, thank you,
outside of
brother.
the
Yeah,
gym
likewise.
once again, and we'll have you back on again soon, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right. And thanks everyone else for listening in. Check out more about our event at heroupsummit.com. And as always, I really appreciate your emails and comments. It's really cool to get feedback from you guys. So thank you guys once again. Talk to you soon. Hey, thanks for checking out the show today. For show notes, event updates, and tons of other free stuff, check out epicallday.com. And if you would, I would love it if you were able to leave a review on iTunes, as this really helps other people find our show. Thanks a ton. I appreciate you listening, and I'll talk to you soon.